thank everybody that has come to the webinar. I see some people that I know and some people that I have not yet met. So I'm just so thankful that you guys have all taken this time, whether it's nighttime, it's morning time, middle of the night, who knows what, to come and join us where we're going to present to you a workflow over the course of 2 different Tuesdays. So this Tuesday for an hour, then next Tuesday for an additional hour, same time, on how you would ingest geochemical data and turn it into not just a lithogeochemical interpretation, but to also put it into 3 dimensions. I want to first start off by introducing my co-presenters here. So besides me, my name is Sam Scher. I'm the principal consultant at LKI Consulting and also the host of Geochemistry, which is a podcast about geochemistry. And just in short, I'm a geochemist. I also work quite a bit in hyperspectral, and I also really do love 3D modeling, so I would call myself an enthusiast in that sense. But I want to introduce more so my co-presenters, who's the first is Julia Oliveira, and the second is Putra Sadikin, and I think they both can now just introduce themselves a little bit and what we're doing here.
Thank you, Sam. I'm so glad. Thank you for inviting me again. Since the first invitation, I was super excited to be here and create this webinar with you. As I said, like 1,000 times, and with Putra too, it's a great opportunity. So my name is Julia Oliveira. I'm based in Santiago, Chile. Right now I am in Santiago, Chile. And I work for Sequent. So I would say that I'm a modeler, a 3D modeler. I work as the senior technical leader for Latin America, what means that I'm the bridge between the commercial and the technical team, supporting to find the solutions and to make our customers achieve their goals with 3D modeling, with sharing files, 3D files, resource estimation, and sharing everything in that world that you feel like. Putra?
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, Sam, for organizing. Shaping up to be a great one. Again, for organizing this. So my name is Putra Sadikin. I'm the product manager for IRGET. I work at Index Limit. My background is in industry, and I have been working with IRGET much of the past decade or so, working in the consulting space and then moving on into product management space. So what I do, the bridge between a custom software engineering team. And if you have used IRGET, you probably have talked to me before in the past. And we haven't really done this in a while. So the last time we did this was in 2020 during COVID, when we did a webinar, Alan Ignacio, just showing the Leapfrog workflow. So today's session is sort of going to just go a bit further than that. Then really excited to show you guys what we can do with it.
All right, great. Thanks for that, guys. And so now just jumping right into it, I created, based off a Sequent template that Julia showed me, I created just a webinar workflow, which is just to show everybody here what exactly we're going to be doing over the course of the next 2 days. So here we have our technical domain. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be working with geochemical data. We're going to be working in drill hole management. So for that, we're going to be using the IOGAS and the Leapfrog geo softwares. In the course of our lithogeochemical modeling, though, we're really going to highlight how we use Leapfrog Central for that. And I think you guys are going to be pretty interested, and especially if you work in bigger companies, how you can go about talking among many different people all over the world and collaborating on each model. And this concept of interoperability, which is just the partnership that we're all working with here. We're working throughout 3 different organizations to come to a common goal, in this case, to present to you guys a webinar. So in this, we have geologists, we have 3D modelers, and we have geochemists. So those would be our domain experts. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to present to you guys the challenge. We're going to give you some background geology of the deposit that we are able to showcase here. We're going to review drill hole data from this third party. We're going to do quite a bit of QA/QC because it's a historic data set. And I think a lot of times when we see things at conferences or read papers, Everything is just so nice and pretty. This data set is not pretty. And I think that's what makes it unique and a great one to showcase here. And the QAQC is not just in the geochemical data, but it's also in the drill holes and it's in the geology itself. We're going to generate geologic models in Leapfrog with this drill hole data. We're going to interpret the geochem data. And then finally, we're going to share this geologic model with the different stakeholders. So in this case, the three of us, for some review and for collaboration to make it into the best product that it can be. The challenge, and in this case, why 3D lithogeochemistry? So there's two overarching challenges that we're seeking to address in this workshop, which is to say we have lithogeochemistry and we have 3D modeling. First, what is lithogeochemistry and how can I interpret my very imperfect data set with confidence? And then with the 3D modeling, how do I know that I've made a solid fundamental base for my 3D geologic model? And then after that, how can I integrate this lithogeochemical interpretation? So going from geology to geochemistry and tying the two together. And really, this is just going to enhance our knowledge of this ore deposit. And I think one thing that I thought about when I was making this challenge slide was, myself as a consultant, am I not here worried about giving away my IP in that sense? Why else are you going to hire me if I'm teaching you how to do it? And really, this information, lithogeochemistry, 3D modeling, none of this is proprietary. This is well known throughout the community, but if you're not a geochemist, you haven't spent as many years, myself and Putra have been doing geochemistry, you're not going to know it off the bat. And I think that this knowledge belongs to everybody, and I'm very happy here to share it with you. And so we have two goals here as well. Whether or not you're interested in geochemistry, maybe you're just a geoscientist that just wants to expand their knowledge, this can be really helpful because if you're reaching out to a geochemist or to a 3D modeler for help, now you're more informed and you can ask better questions. And also, I think that this will also hopefully inspire some geoscientists out there to take a path more towards the dark side, because we need more modelers, we need more geochemists, and that's just the truth of the matter. So hopefully maybe somebody's inspired to, come onto our side after this. The Flin Flon data set. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just to say that Flin Flon data set, it's a VMS deposit up in Manitoba in Canada. And this is a publicly available data set that's been provided to us by the Geologic Survey of Canada. And I think that's just really special and a great way to highlight your own capabilities and also practice different things. It's available to anybody. If you can't find it, just Google it online, send me a message, and I'm happy to give you the link to it. Background geology. Really quickly, guys, Flin Flon is a massive sulfide deposit hosted by a very complex, as we found out, succession of felsic and basalt-dominated heterolithic volcaniclastic rocks, predominantly thick lava flows intruded by volcanic mafic sills and dikes. To the right here, we have a really good cross-section interpretation of what Flin Flon and the 777 and the Caledon deposits look like in the stratigraphy. Look, it was discovered in the early 1900s, and the resource is now currently depleted. Okay, so two things before I hand this off. We're going to start with Putra, who's going to give the geochemistry a first look. In this module, we're going to explore data cleaning, QAQC, a little bit of bivariate, but mostly univariate statistics and how we apply this to understanding our knowledge of the structure of the data set better. And then we're going to kind of finish here with looking at the IOGAS Leapfrog Geo link. And once we go over to the 3D model module, that was difficult. After Putra's component, Julia's going to take over. And I think probably the most special thing that we're going to see here is some of Julia's failed model attempts. She's not, even though she's an expert in her field, she didn't nail it the first time, and neither will you. And it's really interesting the iterations that she's gone through. And I would say kind of one of the most interesting things that when we were talking about is just that she, after some of these failed attempts, she went back and she researched the deposit. So she read some papers, And that led to the construction of the foundation of what's going to be our final lithogeochemical model that we're going to present in part 2. So we're going to integrate pretty much the entire leapfrog toolbox here to construct some shapes that don't also resemble a lot of these kind of saucer-like things that we typically find in a lot of like very amateur leapfrog models. And that's going to be really interesting. And the last part that I think that this module really highlights is the communication that the three of us had in Central. And like we said, Putra, he's over in Melbourne. I'm here currently, I guess, in Arizona. Julia's in Chile, in Santiago. We're all over the world. And so we were able to communicate within a day to just figure out kind of what our next steps were and to try out things. So that said, I'm going to hand this over to Putra now. I'm going to maybe pipe in for some color and everything every now and then, but this really is going to be driven by two field experts, and I'm really excited to show you guys what we've put together here. So Putra.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. Part of there. Right, so that's a great introduction. So really in this first part, what we're going to try to do is how do we get to the lithogeochemistry part of the work? So there's a few things that we need to do before we get there, right? So the first step is really in reviewing the data that comes, right? Sort of knowing where our data comes from, and just checking just the quality of the data in general. So that's and what I'm going to show you now, showing you how we can read data from different places. But we'll just focus on a single workflow for the first part of today's webinar. And that when we start the data from the leapfrog side, we can bring it into our guest and do your data check that way. So by reviewing drill hole data, I'm going to approach it from a geochemist point of view, right? So imagine if I'm working in a project with these two other colleagues of mine from all over the world. And as a geochemist looking at the project file for the first time, the first thing that I would like to do is I want to check what do we have? So what sort of data do we have? So that's the one component of it. So is it intervals data, is it points data? And where do I get my data from? Is that from a single lab, from multiple different labs, different detection method? How was it analyzed? What sort of detection limits are we dealing with? So it's really important to know where your data comes from in that. But you also want to know a bit about the geology context. So do we have anything other than the assay data that tells us a bit about the data? Do we have geology context in the form of lithology logging, alteration logging, all that sort of stuff? And what other information are linked to our assay table? Do we have 3D coordinates? Can we plot this out in 3D? And what do we need to do in order to do that? So, and there's another aspect of this, which is QAQC. And QAQC itself is an entirely different beast, which we're not going to tackle in its full extent in this webinar. But we're focusing mostly on the QC side, meaning that we check for consistency in units, erroneous values, and things like that, right? Which we will go through as we progress through the webinar. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how I can bring in my data, I guess, to review it. So I've got my leapfrog project open here, and I have set drill hole data that I put into a drill hole data table. And what I've done is I have created a new IIGAS data that I would like to bring into IIGAS. So you can see that the link is, you can see here. So this is usually typically, how our users bring in data from, leapfrog to IIGAS. So a lot of you will probably be already familiar with this sort of workflow. And of course, you can go the other way. So if you go the other way from IIGAS to leapfrog, you will need to desurvey your 3D coordinate before you can display it in 3D in leapfrog. But through the process of creating the new IIGAS data, you're calculating the desurveyed XYZ coordinates as you're bringing them. So that allows you to visualize the 3D context of your data. So this is the spatial extent of your data. So if you can see here, those are those are the drill holes that I will bring in from leapfrog into IIGAS. So what I'm going to do is I'll just make sure that the link is connected. I'm going to click this button here in IIGAS, and I'm going to select the IIGAS data to bring in. And we'll just start off just with a bit of a review on what we have, where it come from, and what we can do with it. All right. So I'm just going to focus on the iron gas type for now, and then we'll jump back to Leapfrog later on, and then I'll I'll pass the mic over to Julia. All right. So I've imported the data from Leapfrog to iGas. And the first thing that I like to do every time I import a file into iGas, it doesn't matter come from Leapfrog, from a CSV file, from your database, from your SQL database, from anywhere. And the first thing I would like to do this process called aliasing. So that's the column properties dialog. And I see a lot of familiar names in the chat for this webinar. And I know that a lot of your iGas users, right? So you'll be familiar with some of that, but it's even more paramount or even more important and sort of bringing that from Leapfrog Geo, because what you want to check is just make sure that all of the columns are imported correctly and that everything is aliased to the right element unit combination. And if you haven't seen iGas in action before, what we do with the aliasing process, making sure that iGas knows that you're bringing in a column that iGas recognizes as an assay data. So an element with an element and unit name combination, which allows you to open a number of various things in iGas, including geochemical classification diagram, alteration index, and some of our provided macro workflows, that sort of thing. So all of those things require iGas to know that you're bringing assay data. So everything looks pretty good in here. So everything gets alias appropriately. And all you need to do, okay, in here. So we've done that first step, right? So that first step, just to make sure that all the units are correct. And then we want to just make sure that we bring in all of the holes. So we have a rudimentary 3D viewer in iGas. It's just a really good spatial check. You see that we have bring in all the drill holes. And if I know how many samples that I have in my data, I know that, we're bringing in 4,000 rows. So that's all good. And then, sort of the first thing that I like to do is to just make sure that I have some of the text columns that I need to do what I need to do. So let's start off with just coloring the samples by the whole ID. And the thing about the lifelink is that whenever you do something in iGas, it gets reflected in real time on the Leapfrog side. So I'm changing the colors to whole ID, which is reflected in here. And if I go back to Attribute Manager in iGas, I'm going to change this to a few of the text columns that I have here, like the Litho class 1. You can see it being reflected on the Leapfrog side. All right. But Julia will give more detail later on as to what the Leapfrog can do with the full capability. But sort of this first step in auto attributing by categorical or text columns in your data is actually incredibly useful. Why? Because it allows me to see if there's any issues or problems in the data itself. So as you can see here, there's a bit of a typo or where there's a felsic igneous rock. It's called with an S at the end. It's a felsic igneous rock. So there's a slight typo in there, which means that we'll need to fix that somehow. And that's actually quite an easy workflow to do. Right? So this is normally something that I like to do by going through each column that I have in the file and just doing a bit of this QA/QC, just quality check of the data in iGas. And what I can do is I can just combine these two text columns together in iGas and merge them into a single group. And I'm going to create a new variable from color. And the good thing about this is that it got backflagged as a new column in my file, a new text column. And once I go back to Leapfrog, that new column get added on to the drill hole table. So those are the that's the new table, that's the new column that I've added. So it's that text column check that I like to do when you bring in the data. But we're not here to look at typos and that, right? So we're here for geochemistry. So the thing that we'd like to do next is just look at the data that we have. I'm just looking at the data view and iGas and just get a brief scan of what the data looks like. So as we can see from here, we got some cells that have negative values. So that indicate detection limit and below detection limit values. and we have text values in numeric columns, so text values in assay columns, for example. And we also have values like, minus 9999, which indicate, missing sample or sample not retrieved. So all of those sort of things can actually easily tackle in IGS using our data doctor tool. So in this first part of the workflow, we're just doing a bit of a data review. So we know, we have checked what we have. So we know that we have assay data that have 3D coordinates, and have depth from and depth to. So we can do a lot of things with those. We know that we're dealing with assay data. And now we're going to tackle some of those things that we found in our assay data. So we have a tool called the Data Doctor in IGS. And usually what I like to do is every time I got just a new set of assay data from the lab, I take them to the Data Doctor in IGS, which is a tool to assist in data validation and repair. So you can see from here that there's a bunch of issues in here. The text information in numeric columns below detection limit values. So if you use IGS, you know a bit about this already. But the thing about getting assay data sort of in the real world, this is not a call out. If you get your assay data from your database person, and if your negative value or less than sign has been replaced by positive value, so if you don't have any negative values at all, you might want to have a chat with your database person, because you actually want to know where your data comes from, which lab it gets analyzed in, what sort of detection limit are we dealing with, because it allows you to sort of have a bit of a think about where your data comes from and what you can do, what sort of limitation is there in your data. And the thing with this is that if you have errors or erroneous values like minus 2000, IGAS recommends a replacement value of half of the positive value, which is not necessarily correct in this sense. If you're replacing minus 2000 with 1000, that doesn't seem right. So I'm familiar with sort of this issue in this data. So what I've done, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a quick search and replace tool. And I'm just going to quickly replace minus 2000 with null. So you can see here, so the cell background of A that have been replaced. So those are the ones that have missing values, right? And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the data doctor and just do just a replacement of the negative value with the positive half of the positive value. So you can just go, and the default replacement is sort of half of the lowest value. So in this sense, so if you look at nickel ppm, for example, the lowest half positive value is -1. And so the recommended replacement for that column, 0.5. But we're going to pick a unique replacement value for every detection limit that we have. And that's because we're dealing with multiple labs and multiple assay methods, as we can see later on. So I'm going to click on this button to suggest. Yes.
Yeah,
I
Victor,
didn't
I
get a
just
file.
want to, yeah, I just want to say, because you bring up such a good point. So, a lot of times we can have such great database managers where we'll get something exported to us already from our database that just says everything has been replaced by, say, 0.5, 0.2. So you just don't really notice it at first. But just because you have this beautiful data set that everything, nothing's negative in it, everything has a value or is a null, it can hide the fact that you have multiple different sources of data, whether it's different labs, whether it's different digestions. So it's still important to investigate even a very clean looking database. This one, we're just very lucky that it's just so ugly that we can really see everything that's wrong. But still, you should always be suspicious of where your data is coming from and how many generations of it is in there.
But I think it's not so much that, your database person gives you, a perfect database, which is good and whatnot. But I always find it better to have less assay columns, but assay columns of, assay data of high quality, but less of them, but also have more information in knowing where it's from, how it's analyzed, and the sort of detection limit and what you're dealing with. So
Totally.
any metadata information is good. So you will always need to have metadata information in your table. So even when you're doing hardcore geochemistry work, the more metadata columns it's in your iGAT file or in the project, it's the better. You don't really want to be approaching this blindly. You don't want to be looking at a table of numbers straight off the bat. So the more context you have, better. All right, so I'm just going to replace all of my below detection limit values with something else. And the thing about iGAS files is that it keeps change log. So it keeps a record of what I've done to replace in each column that I've run the data doctor in. So whenever someone gives you a CSV file, you wouldn't have that record. But if someone sends you an iGAS workspace file, I would highly recommend going to the data ribbon and clicking on show change log, because it records manipulation or any adjustment to the values that you have in the data that's contained within that workspace. All right. So the thing about this file, it comes multiple methods that it comes from. So two methods actually, XRF and ITP. So we're just going to evaluate that, and we're going to see how it affects the distribution of our data. So I'm going to just remove all of my colors, and I'm going to look at everything in a probability plot. But there's a lot of elements in here. So I think we got about 62. So that's quite a fair bit of elements. So we're just going to look at this using this viewing option with the scrolling window. And as you have a look through this, you can see that we actually have multiple units for the same element. Trying to see where we have titanium in here. We actually have titanium
at the
in
top.
both. No, it's with the scrolling windows option. So normally when I because at work and at home I have an ultra wide monitor, so I just put everything in the same window. But since we're using just my laptop here, just using a scrolling windows to be able to look at the full resolution a bit better. So one thing that I want to highlight is we got titanium in oxide percent, but we also have titanium in elemental percent. Further down the line, but you can see from here, if I scroll down, you can see titanium in here, and there's actually about only 300 samples in titanium percent. So it's a different assay method. And then we got TiO2, which is analyzed by a different method than that one. So this is the thing with dealing with public data sets. So what can you do? What can you handle with this, right? So what we want to do now, just want to auto attribute by method. And you can see, being a single probability plot, it displays everything in a single trace line. But if I click on this button, split probability plot, you can see that it creates a different line for each of the color group, right? So the color group corresponds to the assay method. So I like to bring up my legend, which is displayed on the right there. And as you scroll down, you can see the difference in response and the difference in detection limit between the two different methods. And you can sort of see for the major elements, you get a broad lead of identical response. And what I like to do is I want to turn on logarithmic scale just to get a bit of a better resolution. And you can start to see the difference, right, between the different methods. So tantalum, for example, in here has a different detection limit. And if I remember correctly, things like tungsten and even some of the elements like bismuth in here has a different response and sort of a different detection limit, which sort of affect how the data is displayed. So that's one thing to highlight from in that when you look back in the Leapfrog project, the colors in here, so the ones in red, which will obviously be XRF, and you have more of the holes around the periphery that we're analyzing using an ITP. So one thing to keep in mind when you start to go into a bit more detail into looking at the lithogeochemistry is in understanding how your different holes are analyzed And the interpretation that you make you gather from a lot of these holes, which has a similar geology to the one in the middle, but seeing that they were analyzed using a different assay method will mean that you'll need to be careful in how you interpret those signals. Not so much of an issue with some of the major elements that we'll be dealing with. So the element in particular that we'll be looking at will be things like titanium, which does have a pretty similar-ish response. And we got zirconium, which does have a bit of a similar response as well. So those are the two elements that we'll start off with in the first and second part of the workflow, and which we'll go through very quickly now, if we're of time, before we go into Julia's section. So what we'll do is I'm just going to select those two elements. So of course, being IO gas, you have a bit more to choose from than just looking at probability plot, right? So you got split probability, but you also have things like histogram to look at your distribution of data a bit better. And of course, you have box plot as well. So this univariate analysis allows you to look at the structure, between assay methods, just doing a bit of a quality check. And what we're going to do now, just going a bit of a rudimentary sense check on, let me just put it in another view. So these are the two elements to be focused on the first part of the part 2 of the webinar. And we can see here that the distribution is quite uniform. So if I change the color in here to my modified litho class 1, you can start to see a few things here that are quite obvious. So your feltic rocks are here. So the ones in purple, which have a lower titanium to zirconium ratio compared to where most of the mafic igneous rocks are sitting. So a lot of these workflows are pretty generic of what you would likely use in this sort of setting. So using a geochemical classification diagram, like the good old Halberg classification diagram, which will allow you to get a bit of sense to what you're looking at. So I thought that would be a good place to finish off my session today. So that's just sort of a first check of what you would like to do. So in order to bring data into IGAS, just do a bit of a reality check where your data comes from, what sort of things you can do with it, and sort of give you a bit of a preview of where we're going next week. So over to you, Julia.
Yeah, and if I could just interrupt super quick, I would say that I feel like if anybody that's been disappointed that we're not going to do the actual lithogeochem today, you have to understand that most of a geochemist's life is doing this step. This is such a huge and integral part of what we do. If you don't do this, we can't do part 2 at all. And I think the time that we spent was well spent, because you could see just in our Flin Flon data set, there's so many imperfections in here, but that could have really big problems if we just didn't check anything and we just went off with interpreting the data as is. So that part, that quality control, we cannot underscore enough how important it is. And I think it's such a natural break before we get into the lithogeochem part of it next week. So thank you, Pucha. To you, Julia.
Yes, and we have a question in the Q&A before I start. Is Thermo Mick, if I hope I said your name right, asked, can see the question, is -2000 a lab code rather than a quantity? Most labs do not report uncensored data. Yes, on the Q&A.
Oh, I
Probably
see.
a lab. There's probably a lab code. You might want to comment on that, Sam. But yes, it's usually a lab code that you want to identify further, but it likely indicating that missing data or sample not be safe in that sense.
Yeah. Perfect. So with me. So I will start before sharing my screen. I will tell a little bit the story. So Puchar was working with all of that on his side. Okay, that's important, on his side. Here in Chile, working, doing everything that I say that you shouldn't do for the cut. working by myself without talking with other people that I'm working with. So I did everything that I shouldn't. And it's quite funny because I found my default and the default that the customers have because we have so like busy days that we can even think that we start doing things without thinking about what happened if I work in a silo and I work by myself. So my first step was that I received from Putra and from Sam few data. I will share my screen of a screen that I took in the afternoon today just to show uh, what I received. So I received some tables and I tried to import to Leapfrog and was truly nightmare. I couldn't import it. I couldn't import the data set. I was telling Putra is missing. So Leapfrog, you report from view. I didn't have the front view there. I didn't have what I needed for Leapfrog. I tried to fix the table. I couldn't fix the table. And I had the brilliant idea of saying, if they don't have the data set, I have meshes that they send me also. So let's start working with the mesh. And as you can see, he sent all of this mesh. What you looking at that, if you're a modeler, you say like, I can model that. I can make that work. That could be a model. It's possible, right? But I had like a big challenge that was quite interesting that if you guys see like these formation points here, I had broken. So if I try to triangulate this, because it's broken, so you can see also here in properties, right click and you see in properties. And when you see the name false here, it means that it's broken. You have one triangle open, so you can transform that into a solid. So I need to retriangulate that. Just like fast, quick tip in how to retriangulate it. Just gonna do quite fast here. So later on, you guys can watch in slow motion if it's necessary. You just go right click on your broken triangulation, extract meshes. It's gonna give you some point. And from that, you go to meshes again. And you can do a mesh operation, or you can do a new triangulated mesh from points. Look for your data. For example, I'm not sure if one. You could use a threshold error to have this translated, and fastly you're gonna retranslate it in a better way without having so much challenges. Let's see if it works. No, I did something wrong. Let's put something here. Let's see if it's right. If you do it live, sometimes it doesn't work, right? Here we go. I don't know where it showed up, but I think it's here. You had some problems here, as you can see. The translated a little bit weird because it had some points. So here we would need to do a interval selection. That is quite easy to do too. You could just come here, right click, do a new category, selection, choose points, and fastly you would have a new tool. Let me click here to be more beautiful. Put it in here. So, sorry. In this case, I already did the selection. I selected the in and out, as you can see here, to select to new triangulated. When you do that, I want to do it again for you guys to see it. It open, when you do the new category, you open an option where you can choose with the selection tool the points. And you can, for example, just to give you guys an example of what I'm doing, can just come here, and select the points and put SE as in out. And then you filter. I can say it later if you guys want me to do go slowly, just send us an email. I can give you step by step, quite slow, and you fix these points that go crazy, and triangulate it. But with
And so
that,
what we're saying is that
yeah.
on one side of the fault and the other one's in the out is on the other side of the fault. Is that what we're saying here?
No, what we're saying, Sam, is that when you triangulate it like I did, what's going to happen? He's going to triangulate it in a way that sometimes you need to clean it out when the points doesn't make sense and do that bridges that were on top like this one.
Okay.
So what I'm doing is taking out the points that generated that, be more continue like that.
That makes
So
sense.
you just take it out this, right?
Right.
I will show you one that I started fixing. See, night neutral related. As you guys can see, I did some fixing in a few meshes. I don't know what is the one, but I fixed this one. I started fixing, but I never finished. See that I still have some points here that I need to finish. And you go like that. You start playing with this type of things to fix your meshes. This is a way that it's a very lazy modeling, I would say, that I did because I was working by myself. And with that, my first frustration point was when I started trying to model this. And I was creating a model, here you go, with all these triangulations, right? So I have here a meshed model, and I start creating this surface to create a model and see what I would have. And I was doing that by myself without talking to Putra, without talking to Sam. And every time I tried to do that, something went wrong. And after that, I was okay. So Putra, can you send me the data set and see what we can do? Let's try to work with that. And for that, what I did, we started working with, and that's the point that I wanted to get. So Putra imported with IonGas his data. He worked on his side, and then he downloaded the project that is here, as you guys can see, connected to an instance of Central that I gave him permission. So for the ones that don't know, what is Central? So Central is a system, a platform that Sequent has that connects the Leapfrog with, sometimes we do Studio or other platforms where you can share, you can audit, and you can create a story about your modeling or about your geology in general. So Putra uploaded this model for me, this first one, and I started working with that. And with that, what I did, let's go back to my thing. I had now uh, almost all this data that Putra sent it to me. Beautiful tables. I saved here some things that I could show you guys. I think it's this scene. No, not this yet. It's last here. No, not this yet. Okay, I'm gonna show it here. So he sent all this beautiful data to me that had this classification, and you had all this information. And what I want to show you guys is one of the tables that I went crazy. So too much data can be dangerous too, because you look to that and you don't know even how to start if you don't know the geology, right? You get super, super lost. So I started asking myself, what should be my first step? I have too much data. I don't know even how to begin. He gave me, oh, here you go. This is the table that he sent me. And you had this table that look into that. Beautiful, not that many ethologists, but what that means. And this one that you also don't have that much data, right? It's possible to model that. But I was looking, I couldn't see any tendency. I couldn't see how were the context. And for the ones that model with Leapfrog, you know that Leapfrog doesn't model the geology. We are modeling the process, right? So how are you going to model the process if you don't know what is the process? And then you had this table that tried to make sense and also couldn't make sense about it. Look how much information, great information, but how does how does it work, right? What it does it mean? And you go with all the information, the really good information that Putra sent to me, that for me it didn't make any sense because first, I didn't know even where Flin Flon was. I did not have no idea what this data set was from, what it needs, what type of deposit it was. So here my first mistake was trying to model something that I didn't know what it. But before going to explain what was the next step, I want to show a little bit of Central to you guys. Open it here. I left the page opened. So the first thing, as I said, Putra upload to us this project, and we start working without talking to each other, and see that I even created a model apart and another model apart that I aborted 2 sessions because I didn't do a good job. So we could, for example, see that, and I can see my model here. What I'm showing here, it's the web where we started telling the story, and I started trying to create something to make sense, right? So let's go back and show you guys. So here we started on 13th of May, and Putra uploaded this model. Then he worked a little bit more, a little bit more. And then on 14th of May, I jumped in and created a model with meshes. And I started creating other models and trying to create another reality until we decided to talk with each other. And I don't know if you agree, Sam and Putra, but it's when the model started getting shape, right? When we start talking to each other is when we started commenting from one each other. And I sent a message to Sam and Putra asking, what does it mean? And then they start answering me. I don't know what you guys think about it.
And I think what's interesting too is I think as geochemists, we just say, let's do lithogeochem, let's model the lithogeochem. Like everybody knows what we're talking about. And, because Julia is super smart. So I was just like, of course she knows what this word is. So I think we got to a part in where we were modeling where actually we were talking at cross purposes because we hadn't properly communicated to Julia, which we started doing the notes and then we did over a call. But what exactly we wanted to do in terms of the entire modeling process. So it was like this interesting thing where Julia was starting to understand the stratigraphy and understand what the Flin Flon deposit was, which was great. But then we're just like, but yeah, the lithogeochem. So it's this like really interesting thing that we started because we have so many different time zones again that we're trying to contact ourselves via. But we started with just going back and forth with Central, and then it just kind of bloomed into something different, which is ultimately what we're showing here.
Yeah, and I think in here, what is interesting that we can see is that you can see the change of scenario is when it is this point here. So Central, it allows you to create what we call branches. So I was not afraid of testing and putting up some story and testing to see if we could continue or not. So what I was doing on my computer, the project that Putra was working, and try some things without messing with his train of thought. And then I got to a point that I was like, shoot, I'm doing the same mistake in the first aborted actually. In the I'm doing the big mistake, as Sam said in the beginning, that I noticed that I didn't know anything about geology. So what I did, I knew that the data set came from a big database that is open online. So I said, we must have a lot of papers about geology. And I gave a stat. And the stat back was, let's read about the geology and understand the deposit. And I found some cross sections. I tried to understand the cross sections. And I tried to understand what geology was. Because I think Leapfrog can do amazing models and give amazing results. But it's going to depend on two really important points. One, you need to have a trustworthy data set. And the second, you need to trust it. You need to know about your geology. If you don't know the geology, don't understand what you're modeling, the software won't do it for you. Like, even if I had Sam, Putra, and myself, and we couldn't understand what the geology means, Pucha wouldn't be able to do any analysis. Sam wouldn't be able to support with the geochem, and I wouldn't be able to model. So here the point is, you can have the best people on your team. If they don't understand the geology that you're modeling or you're analyzing, doesn't matter how good it, okay? So that's the first point here. And then what we did is I added Putra and Sam over this project. I invited them as owner. And then we started uploading these models and talking to Central, creating scenes that I believe we would show in the next session a little bit more about what we did to do the model. I don't want to stop the surprise, but I want to show you one more thing about this. So just explaining what you guys are seeing in this scene. So this is, each point is one project that we uploaded to Central. So you can see that we both did, but what is the interesting part that I love it is that Sam was not with a leapfrog license anymore. I had some trouble. I couldn't give her a license. So we used Central for Sam to see the models. And I think we can go back this point to the next session and show how we communicated with Sam and how Sam could support us with the modeling without having a leapfrog license or without even using the IOGAS. You could share her knowledge as a consultant without needing to have a license, just like giving her knowledge about the geology without opening the software, but just opening Central, let's say, without spending $1 extra on that, I would say. It's quite great. Another thing that I want to show here is that it's pretty small, but I kind of love this. You can put in Central, where is your project for? So for people that have tons of projects that work in different parts of the world, if you put their coordinate, you can put where is your project is, and then I did add, and I discovered exactly where is in Canada the project because I found the coordinates, and here you go. You have the project. Flin Flon is here, and okay, it's a small cute detail that I love.
So, Julia, I
yes?
have a question for you. So, what makes just using the meshes, what makes that like lazy modeling?
Oh, gosh. So the match that we had was like part of the model, part of another model or something that we found on the internet. And I say lazy modeling because I'm not even analyzing. I'm getting the idea of someone else that model. And in my case, I was not even questioning the database, right? I was just replicating what was existed already. And I was not being truly about the database or what the geology is like or what the geology is. That's why I said it was a lazy modeling. It's always good. So people are just saying bye to me. Sorry, Barry. So I just replicated what it already existed. That's why. And I didn't question data set.
So then that was one of your failed models. What was the second one, just to be clear? Because I promised people 2 failed models.
Yeah, okay. The failed models. The first one, then I got the data set. Just 1 second. Oh, for the webinar.
Video report.
Okay. Okay, sorry. My boss was talking to me and bothering me in the middle of webinar. That happened. So the second data set, what I did was I tried to model with a data set. I did a group model that I will show my success later, but I did a group. I got the little group without reading the other point here. Okay, I didn't read the geology yet at this point, and I grouped just by code. So I came to Leapfrog, right click here, new column, and I did a group lithologies. And I tried just to be, again, super lazy of my part. I just got the codes that I found that were the same and looked the same and created a new database. And I tried to model with that. And second field model, or the one that I'm ashamed of, is what I started to do here is I tried to see if something makes sense with that college that I did. And then I had this first monster surface that didn't make great. And it's when I said, like, I need to go back to. And then I went back to geology to read a little bit more about it because I didn't even knew what to do with these Mr. Bubbles, right? It didn't make
Yeah.
any geology sense.
But Julia, that's actually a pretty interesting model because it's a divide between the sedimentary rock and the igneous rock, sort of in the footwall. That's actually quite an interesting sort of boundary shape. Yeah, but also a bit of um, I hate to call it lazy, but we see lazy modeling all the time in the geochem world as well. We just take data at face value and start doing things with it without properly understanding what you're trying to do with this thing. But I mean, and I think that's where we'd like to go through in our next week part of the webinar, in that what sort of geochem things we can do to turn into models. What sort of things that we like to achieve. So we start with the objective in mind before we actually start doing the work. And there's of course the iterative part of the process. But if we start with a destination in mind, then we'll be at a much better place as we go through.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
next session we'll go to that point. I wanted to answer a question that came from Dan on the chat. He's asked, is like a fun version control so you can merge back into master branch, or do you just close branches? In the case of Century, you just close branches. You could like import that for the master branch. You could do that workflow, but it's another type of workflow. Then if you want to see more details, just write me. I will put my email here and just send me an email. We can organize a meeting and I can show you in more detail. You have workflows that you can create. But talking about in these last 3 minutes about next session, I will show when I started doing a better job in modeling after reading the papers and knowing and understanding what it means. It's gonna be fun. And the model, I promise that it's much better.
And I guess one thing that I'll just say about Julia's original idea to group lithologies, true, lazy on a modeling side, but it's actually a good strategy that we'll be looking at when we're doing our lithogeochem by organizing them first and only looking at the mafics at one time. Like, you can do that. That's a good strategy, but you'll often find that there might be 2 or 3, etc. mafic packages, and you can see that distinctly in the chemistry.
But the group is a good strategy if you understand what you're doing. Don't go just for the cold piece. Like, have the same letter. Let's put together. Don't do that. That's the okay that I did.
Great. So guys, look, I don't want to hold everybody too much longer. The summary part 1, we understand now a bit more about the geology of the Flin Flon deposit, the different softwares that we're using, IOGAS and Leapfrog Geo and Central, and how they're integrating with each other. That nothing's going to work the first time, whether it's a really old historic database, it's importing even drill holes in really bad CSV files into Leapfrog, or any modeling software for that sense, or even modeling the first time or the second. And like, unlike what you see at papers or conferences, data sets are almost always messy and our solutions are always going to be imperfect. So, like, don't feel alone that, that the deposit that you're working on or the exploration program that you're working on is really messy and you can't find a resource on the internet to help you, analyze it, because everybody just seems to really love publishing perfect case studies. And that's why I love that we chose this one, because it's so imperfect. And you can point out, hey, what happened here or what happened here. And hopefully from all those little things, there's some takeaways all the time that you guys can get from this. And then lastly, I just want to say part 2, where we're going, which is next week. You can register the same place that you registered for the first one, lkiconsulting.com/events. You can register for the second one. So where we're going We're going to do the full lithogeochem interpretation of the Flin Flon data set with the steps broken down so you guys can see them, you can replicate them. Obviously, this is, a VMS deposit. It's its own thing. Every deposit's going to be different. So the steps you can replicate, but the exact elements, it might be different. So, nothing's exact, but we're going to do our best to try and share with you a workflow. We're going to integrate this interpretation into the 3D geologic model. And we're going to show you guys some final deliverables that you could provide to your exploration, your mining company, camp, who you're working with. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for being here. And we look forward to seeing you next week. I'll continue posting on LinkedIn. And again, I'll just write it for everybody in the chat right now where you can register for part 2. We have a question. I wonder how we can get you answered. I see clapping hands. I appreciate that. People. It would Ariel. Can I allow mic? Did that work? Maybe can you write your question in the chat? Let me just try and type this really quick. Okay. Ariel, if you can type your question here. Thanks, Angelica. And there's the link in the chat for part 2. Oh, you just want to clap. Thank you guys so much for being here. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Okay, guys.
Like
Bye.